Jacqueline Thng. There she is.
Wow. Hello. It's really, really hard to do a talk after Scott, because how do you talk an ex-priest who can rally the people and make you convert them, right? It's really hard. So my name is Jacqueline. I'm from Singapore. Are there any people who speak Chinese here? From China? Anybody from China? I thought I saw some yesterday. I was going to do the whole thing in Mandarin today, but I'll do it in English. So what I'm going to share today is a little bit different. I've been in the business of strategy and helping companies grow in Asia for the last 20 to 30 years. I know I look a little bit old, but I'm actually an AI. You know why? I'm intelligent. I'm also artificial, because in Asia, you go to Seoul, I see my aesthetic daughters, I make myself look younger than I should be, so I'm an AI. You don't get it? Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little bit about looking back at what Mark Zuckerberg did in 2016. He painted a 10-year roadmap of Facebook. And basically what he did was he integrated a world where brands communicate in a very different way. There's lots of technology, AR, VR, AI, everything is part of the world. And that was his 10-year roadmap from 2016. Today, in Asia, this is past tense. This is old. We live in a world today, especially in Asia, where people are constantly on machine. I mean, you guys, I don't know, if you wake up the first thing in the morning, do you kiss your husband or boyfriend, or do you look at your phone? Probably the phone, right? You do the same thing before you go to bed, right? You don't kiss your husband or boyfriend or your children, you look at your phone. So it is a world that is constantly engaged in the machine. And I think in Asia, it's even more so. And in fact, the world today are doing a few things, especially in Asia. They want you to look at a world where customer experience is all about recognizing me, it's all about rewarding me, it's all about respecting me, it's all about making me feel good. And I think Scott talked a little bit about all of those factors. How do you gather people and make the experience better? I'm in a branding world, and I'm in a world that operated before internet ever existed. So when I was a consultant 20-odd years ago, there was no internet. How do you get information, right? So I don't know whether you live in those worlds. I used a VHS before. I still play vinyl. It's hard to evolve. So in the early 1990s, brand was a one-way communication. You tell people who you are and what you do. You communicate one way. And when the internet boom started in the early 2000s, it was a little bit more of, we hear you, we communicate a different way, you talk to each other a little bit, and it's a little bit more customization. But today, branding lives in a completely different world, very full context. It's what we call living brands, right? Brands do not operate in one dimension, but multidimensional. It is living, it's talking and experiencing all the time. And in fact, this is already happening. IBM is doing that through the brands. They already have Watson's AI as part of the entire ecosystem. They can help you plan, you can talk to a car, you can talk to a machine who can plan the whole itinerary. So if you stay in some hotel these days, they can tell you exactly the weather and where to go in Riga. Radisson doesn't have it. They should have an Alexa within the room, and then they can tell you, is it going to snow today? All of that should happen, and Watson's doing that. But let me tell you a little bit about the future. And the future belongs to, I think, Asia, right? I'm a bit biased. I think I'm the only Asian in this room. Yeah. Well, I'm from Singapore. It's a very small country, just like Riga, so don't be nervous, I'm not from China. So if you look at the future, the snapshot is, in the next, I would say 20, 30 years, half of all of the commerce is going to happen in Asia. The most consuming about 10 out of the 15, 11 out of 15 most consuming cities will be in Asia. But Asia is not China. A lot of people say, oh, let's talk about Asia, let's talk about China. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context of what that is before I talk about China. So first, I come from a place called Singapore, which is part of ASEAN. Anybody know much about ASEAN? I think this morning, Philip shared a little bit about Southeast Asia. But in short, this is a very underlooked market that I think is actually more appropriate for European countries. ASEAN is like EU. ASEAN has different countries that operate within this dimension. It will be the 4th largest economy in the world, bigger than EU and bigger than USA. It is, however, a developing market, as you hear this morning from Philips, right? It is a market that has 3 different kinds of cities and countries that operate quite differently. The population is 640 million. It's huge. It's very, very big. Singapore is only 6 million. But we operate in a region that has huge opportunities. It's almost similar to China, where you hear a lot about Tier 1 cities, Tier 2 cities, and Tier 3 cities. I'm sure you hear a lot about that. Tier 1 being like Shanghai and Beijing, Tier 2 being Chongqing and Tianjin, Tier 3 being like outskirts of China that people are still living. I'll talk a little bit about that. But in ASEAN, in about 10 years' time, you realize there's a huge economy that you cannot ignore. It's also an easier market for European brands because it is similar to you. They use a similar digital platform. It's not like China, which is a closed digital landscape. This is very similar to EU. It is also a market that is very young. 60% of them will be under 35. And then it is also a market that will be extremely digital by 2020. And the next big market, as we probably know, that's going to overtake in terms of population is going to be India, right? India will overtake China in terms of population in about a couple of years' time. It will be the biggest market in the world. It will also be the market that has the biggest e-commerce market in the world, growing faster than China. And in fact, about 330 million people will be buying online. So it's another market that you should think about because the Indians love foreign brands. The Indians love anything that is English, right? So you should market to them in English and don't try to do Tamil or Hindu. No, they love the British, right? And it is also a market that it's fairly young and growing. And then there is China. And I think we cannot ignore this huge monster that the Chinese government has created, right? I do not like to work in China. No offense to any Chinese people here. I'm Chinese, but I don't like Chinese. you see it on YouTube anyway, right? But it is a big market, and I need to tell you a little bit of story of why they behave the way they do. I can say we, but it's not quite right. But there's a phenomenon that Scott talked about, the herd mentality and why they behave the way they do. It is a huge market that has about 60% of them in the middle class. We're talking about 8.2 trillion market, huge. And we're talking about also a market that's getting very old. Believe it or not, about 300 million people will be very old, aging. But there is also this thing called the little emperor that's growing up. So you know about the Chinese policy of one child? There's about 36% of the whole country who are mostly little emperor. A lot of men, not enough women. And what is interesting about China too, it is a huge market that will be #1 in the world and overtaking the whole market of US. And we're talking about a market that has about, who spend like crazy. You know, you hear about the Singles Day. So Singles Day was born because a lot of people couldn't get married, right? So that's the reason why it's called a Singles Day. But if you think about what they consume on the Singles Day, this is a sale from Taobao last year, 30.8 billion in just one day. What is interesting, though, is not how much they sell, but 40% of those brands that were sold on that day were all foreign brands, not local, right? So this is something to think about. The Chinese are not just buying their own products. They're buying more and more and more foreign products. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about China, just to give you a little bit of a context. So for those who know about China, it was obviously a communist market, very much similar to Russia, that was opened up. The Chinese is going through this massive infrastructure change in the country. The rail system is changing. They're building this one belt, one road kind of a climate that will go throughout all of the continents. It is revolutionizing the digital market. It is changing the whole landscape. But what the Chinese government did is they protected the market, right? So you'll see that Facebook, Google, none of these brands can go in because they did not want the Chinese company to fall behind the big tech companies from US. So they protected the market. They created a closed economy. And I think they succeeded. And in fact, they've overtaken, I think, the tech companies, the likes of Google, Amazon, and what have you. If you go to China today, I think this morning somebody shared, the homes are more smart than you imagine. You think China? It's true. They're crazy about it. But I tell you something about Chinese, right? Anything you sell to them at home, you notice is all Chinese brands. The Chinese have this thing called a projection status that's very important. Anything they buy at home has to be cheap because no one is going to see it. It's true. I'm not kidding. That's the reason why 40% of all luxury goods are bought by the Chinese today. Anything that they consume outside of the home needs to be seen. Have you seen somebody who is LV head to toe? Louis Vuitton, the louder the logo, the better. The outer projection is very important. And this huge affluent class has a lot of money. And they are spending it, and they're not saving it, they're not investing in it. Because they just, suddenly, the market is open up. And in fact, right now, they are buying more and more premium products. And I'll tell you a little bit of a research we do. They're willing to pay for products that's a premium. They want to trade up, they're not trading down. We did what we call in Profit, we did a brand relevance index about 4 years ago from US. We did it in Germany, UK, and we did it in China. So I led the research in China, trying to understand a little bit about why Chinese buy the things they buy. So the brand relevance index tracked which brands are the most relevant to the Chinese. So we spoke to about 13,000 consumers across 249 brands in all the different cities. There's about 47 Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. And we asked them about 4 dimensions of how brands are rated. We want to find out what is important to them. Is it the functional attributes of the brand, or is it an emotional portion? So the first dimension is all about customer obsession. How well do you understand them? Secondly, it's all about being ruthlessly pragmatic. Are you available where the brand needs to be available? Convenience. And the next thing we want to find out is, do the Chinese like brands that make them feel good, make them feel happy, inspired? And finally, do they buy into products that's more innovative? So we tracked 4 of this dimension across all of the brands, and we found out that in the early years in 2016, functional attributes were more important. It has to be practical, it has to be available, it has to be something that makes them feel that it's sufficient. But over the last 3 years, we saw a change. So in fact, the top 10 brands that we saw in China were these. The number 1 brand delivered on being extremely pragmatic. Alipay, right? It was a payment system that they created and just became dominant, right? So everybody paid through Alipay. So out of the top 10 brands, 7 were all Chinese. It's interesting, right? And they were mostly in tech, consumers and electronics. And if you look at the top 50, they were all dominated again by 30 Chinese brands. A lot of them in electronics, social media, tech, some luxury cars and hotels, but you don't see FMCG products. Because brands like toothpaste, they don't think it matters, right? So you won't find the most, and Colgate, for example, is having a hard time trying to sell toothpaste to the Chinese because you can't brand it. They don't care. I wash my teeth with salt. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a brand. You can get this report from the Profit website, by the way. And one of the things that we found over the last 3 years was that initially, when I did the research in 2016, there was just 18 Chinese brands in top 50. But 3 years later, there were 30. What does this tell you? The Chinese people are beginning to understand brands and products where it is not about a brand, but it's about the quality and substance. So we saw, for example, in the Tier 1 city, which is more kind of developed, the Beijing and the Shanghai, where they used to love brands like Apple more, Now they're buying Huawei, their own products. Doesn't mean they're trading down because Huawei isn't a cheap product. And we saw that they have actually evolved, but the tier 3 cities are buying the upper brands. And we also saw in the tier 3 cities a different scenario. The people in the lower tier cities are more aspirational. They need brands to project their status, unlike tier 1 cities, right? Tier 1 city consumers are becoming more sophisticated. They understand the brand story now. They understand the brand quality. They're confident to buy whether it's foreign or local as long as you're good and you make me feel good. So in fact, there's a trading up mentality that's going on. The Chinese consumer will pay more than the US or the European market. So you can sell to them more, right? So if you want to make more money, don't price your product cheap. And what is also interesting is it's all because of the evolution of the digital. So as you know, China grew and leapfrogged the entire PC, right? So more than 50% of the country have never used a computer. They went straight to the mobile phone. So everything you do in China is through mobile. Everything they do, they eat, they sell, they talk, social media is all on mobile. But what is important in China is this group of consumer, they don't call them millennials, Generation Z, no. In China, it's all about the post-90s or the post-2000s. Anybody born after the 1990s have a familiar kind of a little emperor kind of a habit. A lot of them will order food on delivery, 50% of them. And a lot of them would actually be buying products online through the mobile phone all the time. So if you want to win in China, you've got to go through mobile. And what is so interesting is that we learned that they're also spending more than they should. That means they're buying a lot more than they have money, right? They just buy on credit. And have you seen any of the Chinese website before? You have seen? I think that's so ugly, you know? I mean, you talk about user experience, simplicity, all of those BS, the Chinese said no. If you look at their website, if you look at their product, it's so ugly, right? This is because of the Cultural Revolution, where information was protected and they were not given information. And suddenly now it's like, I want information because you're giving it to me now. So the more, the better. So if you're designing a website or a mobile or user experience in China, please don't try to use the Western approach of being, you know, there's no such thing. So give it all to them, right? You have no idea what you're looking at. They love that, right? So I mean, I think it's awful, but you have to be a Chinese to understand what that is. So it's dominated by the few brands that you already know, from Tmall, JD.com. So it is all because the psychology, as Scott mentioned. And what is also interesting is the community that Scott talked about earlier is happening in China. More and more of the Chinese are coming together to form tribes and community. They share information and video. They love to do self-expression. And this is where marketing is very different. You don't advertise through the traditional top, below the line, above the line. Social media plus e-commerce comes together. And you've got to allow them to share information and talk about the brands. And Chinese are getting more fit. They even love to show off, this is my routine, and on an app called Keep, I'll show you how to exercise. And they're following people, strangers, of how to actually exercise. It's crazy. So the thing about the Chinese is if you want to market to them, you've got to be able to elevate their self-projection. You've got to make them feel good. Even though you think shit of them, don't. Make them feel good. That's important. Secondly, anything you do, they want more information. They feel the power of knowledge, which means the more information they give, the better they respect your brand. And the next thing they want to do is you've got to be able to tell me why my products are good. The more information, the better. You heard about a food scandal, the milk scandal in China many years back. So authenticity is very important. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new trends of e-commerce in China next. One of the things that's already happening is in China, a country with 1.4 billion people, are trying to use robots to serve the retail market. It's a bit crazy. I mean, it's like they have a lot of cheap labels. So why do they use robots, right? They just want to do it. So you start to see a lot of shops in China literally using AI, robots to be literally serving you. So if you go to restaurants in China, you can order on the table, and a drone will move in the room and deliver the food. Seriously, it's really happening. And I was wondering why, it's so silly, right? They got so many cheap labels. But they need to show off this thing about technology. So in fact, China today has evolved e-commerce into something they call new retail. You heard about the O2O, offline to online, a lot. They really embed all of this together. And this started many years back when Jack Ma said the new retail will evolve where data, where brand experience, and all of that will come together, will form a new way of how Chinese should actually buy stuff and engage in retail. And this has evolved. I mean, this is a model that you're seeing. What's happening now is to the extreme right model is where it is happening today and it's getting a lot of traction. And I'll show you some example. So the model of retail and e-commerce in China has 3 stages. The first stage is about how you make a retail experience that's extremely functional, make buying easy. Second, you've got to make sure that, no, I can't really read actually. The second one is all about celebrating their lifestyle. The Chinese want to be liberated from the stress in life. They want to be able to celebrate that. And thirdly, it's all about a new way to progress them, to make them feel even better. So, brands like Kentucky Fried Chicken literally have a new way for them to order. People would order the KFC before they go to the store. When they go to the store, they will scan, and all the food will be delivered to them. They don't really try to queue anymore. So this whole phenomenon of KFC, of food ordering, has grown, right? So it's 100 million people who order fried chicken every day. There's also a store called, this is Beehive in Chinese. It is a store that actually is not manned by anybody. So it's a 24/7, a bit like 7-Eleven, convenience store, if you may, that has nobody in the store. It's completely like Amazon, done by people. So you order online, or you can walk in, everything will be captured through the QR code. And in fact, they're using the data to be able to have SKU that's customized to different locality. So this really helped the small mom and pop shop, isn't it? You know exactly who is buying what in those locations. This is Tmall, the Taobao people, who is now doing a new offline kind of retail shop for the mom and pop stores, and they're experimenting with 10,000 of them. They're converting a lot of Chinese mom and pop shop into Tmall shops. So the online experience is very big in China. What really is happening is the offline is growing. The Chinese have gone online so long that now they want to experience a physical store. That's why the O2O. So even though we talk about digital and online, offline is actually more important and will grow. And I'll run through quickly and show you an example of a new phenomenon of a new store by Alibaba called Herma. Do you know of this? I'll show you the video and you understand what it is. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? It's almost like a big distribution warehouse, supermarket, all in one. You walk in, you can scan the information you want, and then it can cook for you on the spot, or you can order straight away using QR code, and then they will pack for you within 30 minutes, it will be delivered to your house. So the entire experience of brand is very different, and the entire retail is very different. And I'll end off a little bit about why key opinion leaders are very important. And it is not about using David Beckham or anybody like this. It is also using the consumers every day. So you'll see more and more social media come e-commerce store merge into one. And you'll see a lot of celebrity promoting their daily ritual of selling skincare or the latest Louis Vuitton bag just by promoting it through social media. And this is huge because they trust this media much more than advertising. And finally, the latest craze that's happening in China now is all about new retail that makes and celebrate your progression to make you feel better. Nike has opened a new store called the Nike Innovation Shop, where you go in and learn about how shoes are actually made. You learn about how to have personalized training program, and you learn about how to actually make you feel that you're not an athlete, but I can actually be under part of it. So you can go to innovation stores in Nike in Shanghai right now, where you actually are being able to make your own stores and shoes and go home. And Starbucks has opened the largest roastery in Shanghai, where people will go in and can see the entire process of how coffee is made. This is really important because, as you know, China is a tea country, right? They used to drink tea a lot. So what is happening in here for Starbucks is that they're bringing a new level of experience where you can see how coffee is being roasted in front of you, you can smell it, you can buy merchandise all around it, and it's a whole new way of 360 in terms of the experience. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier today, that brands today, it's multidimensional. It's all about living brands. It talks to you, it engages you, it lets you experience the brand, and it's not just one portion of it. So that's the end of my session today. So I think any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. All right? Thank you.